On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Scott Persinger. He is the VP of Engineering at Tatari. We're going to cover a topic that I think is crucial to a lot of engineering managers and engineering leaders, and that's balancing team velocity and ensuring quality. And I know Scott has a few viewpoints to share on the topic. I'm excited to have him on. Scott, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Amir. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. And just to set some context, kind of give everyone a little bit of overview of who you are and what the company does.
So I'm VP of Engineering at Tatari. Tatari is a data and analytics company. We provide a software platform that we use to help our customers buy and measure TV advertising. And that's across both traditional and streaming TV. And so we really help brands execute and optimize successful TV advertising strategies that help them grow their business.
Awesome. Sounds like a really cool space to be in, given how TV has been changing. And
a whole another podcast. Totally. Yeah, no, it's a crazy, chaotic landscape with media and a lot of just excitement. We work with a lot of kind of up-and-comer, disruptor, direct-to-consumer brands that have really found and are finding a lot of success in kind of growing their businesses through this new marketing channel that those companies they're very comfortable with Facebook and Google, kind of digital advertising and the 800-pound gorillas. But TV is still very chaotic, complex, expensive, and we help try to cut through all that noise and help show them that it can be an effective channel for them.
Very cool. Maybe we'll have you on another time to kind of dive into that side of the house. I'm sure people kind of find some of what you guys are working on interesting. But topic that we're covering for today, we're going to be talking about how your engineering org balances, obviously getting out, quality code on time, balancing that velocity, all those things that are real important. I'm sure your product managers are always looking to push the envelope. So maybe start at the top for us and kind of explain how the engineering department's set up. What kind of, probably Agile Scrum, but kind of talk to us about what kind of rituals you guys do and just kind of give us a bit of a baseline before we start the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So we're set up as a set of teams. We have a number of product development focused teams that typically are paired with the product manager, engineering manager pair. And then we have a few platform teams that are creating the infrastructure and frameworks, that the product is built on. So we have kind of that, fairly straightforward structure. We run, kind of agile processes that vary a little bit in details between the particular teams. And so I think, velocity is one of these great enduring concerns of essentially every software company, but especially like fast growing startup software companies is how do we maintain velocity? And I think most companies go through this natural evolution where you start with the small kind of startup team that kind of works in the early days. Everybody's a generalist, but like really focused on the mission and just kind of naturally knows how to move fast. But then as the organization starts to grow, you start worrying about, okay, how do we maintain that kind of sense of velocity? And how do we not drown ourselves in meetings and process and trying to coordinate across teams? So that's something I spent a lot of time thinking about. So Tatari Engineering, we doubled last year. We're going to double in size again this year. And so I, concern myself with how do we kind of build and maintain velocity? What is the trade-off in terms of not wanting to generate too much tech debt, wanting to make sure we have a reliable and performant system, but really how can we best help the business grow and keep up on the engineering side?
Absolutely. Definitely sounds like you guys evolving very quickly. You mentioned something right there about the trade-off, not too much tech debt, and we'll kind of bring it back to a higher level, but I want to ask a question about that particularly. So from your point of view, when do you kind of see that trade-off of being, we've got to hit this deadline? And again, I think, somewhere in between this conversation, as you answer this question, we're going to have to define what quality might mean as well. But I guess the question of when do you go, I'm going to go ahead and get this out. I know I'm accumulating a little bit of debt and we'll fix it down the road, but it's important enough that I'm going to do it. Like, is there a balance in terms of, decisions for technical purposes for that?
Yeah, definitely. I think tech debt is inevitable. You're always going to generate it to some degree. And so I'm okay with teams making some expediency decisions in order to meet deadlines. For what it's worth, we try not to have a lot of hard deadlines. And instead, we try to optimize for kind of generalized moving fast rather than any particular project and putting a hard date on it. But I think it's inevitable when you're moving fast, you are going to generate some tech debt. And so the question is just, how do you know if the amount of debt you have today or that you're generating new is sustainable? Are you generating so much debt that you're going to kill yourself 12 months or 24 months, down the road? And this happens, and it's very typical that people run super fast for 6 or 9 months, ship a ton of stuff, and then they realize, oh my God, we just accrued a mountain of tech debt. We got to take a quarter off and pay that down. And that's okay. And I've worked in a lot of organizations where we kind of did the pendulum swing back and forth in that way. But I think the sort of idealized state is that you're always paying down your debt and you're kind of never letting it get too out of hand, right? So then the question becomes, okay, how do you know if you're generating debt at a sustainable rate, or how do you know if you have sustainable, level of tech debt? And on that measure, what I try to do is focus, and this is kind of one of my big sort of levers for velocity in general, is to focus on team health. And I think if you focus on team health and you ask, are people getting burned out? How much project time do they get versus interrupt time versus operational time? Those are things you can generally measure or survey, fairly accurately. And I think you can use team health as a good barometer of, are we at a sustainable, level of technical debt as we're moving forward?
Interesting. And I guess maybe take one step back as well. When you're looking at quality, because I think this came up in a previous episode, what does that mean to you? I mean, is it just all tech debt, or are you looking at other aspects that could include, being encompassed by quality?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I think there's kind of the external customer's view of quality, which in our world actually has a lot to do with the accuracy of the data and the analytics that we deliver to our customers. And so that we really have a big premium on kind of data quality as one of our primary metrics. And then there's kind of internal quality. And so tech debt can kind of contribute to both of those. But when you think about internal quality, it's more like how much toil and operational burden is there just to kind of operate the system at increasing scale. And so how much time are people burning, responding to incidents or handling support tickets, that kind of, sense. So for us, the data quality is sort of part of the product, and we can reason about it as part of the feature that we are delivering to people and balance its priority against other features that we're delivering. But the internal burden is, I think, where, again, you say, well, let's focus on team health as sort of our proxy here, because it's hard to know what is the absolute number uptime that we need, or how many L1 incidents is an okay number to have in order to move fast, right? Because you want to move fast and you don't want zero. You don't want zero faults, because that means you're not progressing fast enough. And so when you think about how do we measure, those kind of faults and what's an acceptable level, I think that kind of focusing on team health as that proxy is a reasonable, sort of approach. Obviously, you don't want 3 days of downtime a quarter, right? But it's within that margin of kind of how reliable could the system be? You can sort of find the point where you're happy with, your ability to sustain the system at that level, given the people that you have, while also, making a lot of forward progress on your product.
Awesome. Let's dive a little deeper. I think, I've asked this question before and I've gotten different answers of how people measure team health. I haven't heard that. And I really like the three components you included there: project versus interrupt versus operation time. When you're looking at team health and as a good barometer, and you're looking at those three different metrics, well, I guess I'm going to ask you, how do you measure those three different time buckets?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think there's not really any kind of perfect answer. I try to counsel people to look for a low tech solution. I had a manager who his approach was to send an email to his team every Friday and ask them to estimate how much percent of their week did they spend on project time versus interrupts, and support. And it was like, whatever, it took them 30 seconds to answer that email every week. But if you do that and you do that consistently, you can actually build a pretty good, model and view. And I think with that, since you're asking people just to reflect on the current week, you can actually get like pretty good data. Now, some people try to measure ticket increase in Jira, or they're looking at open time to close time of a Jira ticket and aggregating all that data together. I think all those things are fine. In my experience, the tools can be kind of deceiving, and you can sort of overinvest in trying to like exactly measure, sort of what's going on. But I think some basic things like, what is the inbound ticket queue depth of this team? If I just sample it, once a week, does the number look like it's just going up, straight up to the moon, or is it sort of level? Or, then that gives me some reasonable signal to start informing, those things. So I guess my answer is sort of like, yes, you want to measure it. Don't go overboard. Don't look for perfect certitude about what it is, but try to do something that's reasonably lightweight that you can do on an ongoing basis. Because really you're trying to look at like, what is the trend line?
That makes sense. I guess the follow up to that is, as you're going through, you finish a sprint and you guys are sitting down, time to estimate and put points and get people to commit. How is that, does the team use, I guess, the concept of team health? Do they actually incorporate that? Is that your management piece of you observing them, or do they actually incorporate that in terms of estimating how long things are going to take, knowing that obviously in reality the days are probably being interrupted with three different buckets? That's just, factual.
Right. Yeah. It's great if team members have a sense of self-awareness about the health of the team that they're working on. It's easy for that not to be the case, right? It's easy to just be the frog boiled in a pot, and you just kind of, it just happens very gradually over time. And you wake up one day and kind of realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm spending like more than half of my week just managing Slack messages and tickets and incidents and whatever. So I do generally expect it's more of a management concern, and the engineering manager on the team to be kind of thinking about the health of the team. And I ask all my managers to kind of develop a framework of understanding of where do they think their team is in terms of health, what are the things that they need to improve, what's working well, and kind of come up with an actual plan and to fix it, right? And so the plan might be, hey, we don't have enough people. Like, we just have a ton of stuff we're trying to build and support, and we don't have enough people. And then we'll sit down and talk about hiring, more people. But sometimes it could be, we don't have the right skill set, or we don't have the right contract with some other team. And so they keep reaching out to my lead engineer on Slack and asking him to do things. And we say, okay, we need to like set up a contract that says, no, you like file a ticket here, and we're going to like triage those things and figure out who works on them. Right. So figuring out ways to, I asked the manager to kind of come up with a plan to like get the team to a healthy state and figure out what resources or support they need to do that.
Absolutely. I guess out of curiosity, you have 7 teams that you're responsible for. I guess, do you run managing those teams along the same lines? Is there, I guess, you're managing the managers of those teams. How do you deal with those managers?
It's a different context as we are the management team, right? And so we as a team are working together. And so to talk about team health is sort of like talking about, well, the management cohort of this engineering organization, is that, in a healthy place or not? And I probably only have a certain visibility into there, and I need feedback, from those managers. I need feedback from other stakeholders, my CEO in the company. And so, we do try to have like build those kinds of things into like our performance cycle to get some kind of 360 kind of feedback from people that can help us. I survey my managers, how am I doing as their manager? And then we also kind of sort of try to get some, ongoing feedback from other stakeholders in the company.
I think team health is an interesting concept. I've heard other managers talk about different ways of measuring the velocity, looking for a baseline. I think team health is actually really, I like the idea. I think it's kind of evaluating if your engineers are tired, that's when issues crop up. And when you're looking at doubling your team potentially, last year, this year, and you're going to double again in size, and you're starting to look at that capacity of when you mentioned we just don't have enough people to hire. What does that tipping point look like? You're talking, you're looking at team health, you're looking at that as a barometer for velocity. When are you like, hey, listen, we got to add two, three more engineers to this team because the team's just kind of bursting at the seams?
So, because we've been on this pretty steep growth ramp, my bigger problem is teams getting too big for the manager. And so my bigger problem is actually hiring managers and being able to like give everybody, sufficient kind of management bandwidth, more so than it is teams that are too small and kind of like their duties have grown too large. But I do expect that at some point, either if growth plateaus or maybe just as the org gets bigger, we will have places where, things may settle. A good example might be our DevOps team, right? We only have 3 people on a DevOps team now supporting, more than 50 in the broader sort of organization. So that's a good example where that team has been and kind of continues to be largely interrupt driven, which sort of feels okay because you sort of feel like, well, DevOps is kind of a service function anyway. But there are larger projects and larger roadmaps, and I would like to see that team, get out of so much kind of interrupt driven firefighting mode and more working against proactively against their roadmap. And so just the fact that I can see working with them that they are most of their effort is consumed by a lot of interrupt driven work and supporting the broader organization tells me that they need more resourcing to be able to do more, deliberate projects.
Absolutely. I guess when you're kind of looking at the way you've adjusted the last, 8, 9, 10 months of, more remote work than we might have all anticipated, does your evaluation, your insight into the teams, have you started looking at different mechanisms, different ways of being able to evaluate some of what we've been talking about?
I think most of what we've talked about here translates pretty well to the remote world. Well, I will say that trust is like this hugely valuable principle, right? Both in the org broadly, but even on teams. And that's one of the almost binary metrics for team health is there good trust amongst team members with their manager. And I do think that is just much harder in a fully remote environment than when you have people face to face. And it's funny, when I was at Heroku, we were more than 50% remote in engineering, but we had evolved all these systems about having quarterly offsites for teams. We would have a yearly offsite, we'd get everybody together, right? So we baked in face to face time to make sure that people got a chance to establish those kind of personal relationships to peers across the org. And I feel like that's been a lot harder with just everybody remote, no travel, no way to get anybody together. And so I worry about trust. I worry about trust eroding. And I've actually been really happy at Tatari. We have this great people team that organizes these like crazy events. We do like a sort of Tatari's Got Talent like weekly thing where they pick a random person and they just do a video call and they like present their weird talent of whatever it is, playing the violin or something. And so they've created a bunch of these kind of remote friendly activities and ways for people to build that kind of social bonding, which has been great. But I still worry just in general that like without that face-to-face time, how do you make sure, people really trust one another? And I think that's just one of those things that you see very clearly in the org when it usually crops up as there's some technical disagreement between this person on these two teams, and they're really fighting over something. And almost always those are symptoms of some trust deficit between those people.
Awesome. Obviously, that trust component is, I'm sure there's a lot of companies struggling that just because you're meeting teammates you've never sat across in your life
Totally.
through the interview process. So I think that's definitely an interesting challenge. I love the notion of managing team health as the barometer for velocity. I was going to say thanks for coming on and sharing these concepts. I think it's been fantastic.
Cool. Great. Amir, it was really great joining you today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if somebody wants to get in touch on anything you talked about, is LinkedIn a good way to get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah. People are welcome to reach me on LinkedIn, DM me on Twitter. You can email me, Scott at Tatari TV. Yeah, anything.
We'll put all those in the show notes. Thanks again for being on. And that's it for this episode. We'll be back again with another guest. And I always ask for two things from everyone. One is keep the topics coming in. I like it because it's having me pair up with the right manager and cover areas that the audience wants to hear. So I appreciate that. And the other is, keep subscribing, tell people. The podcast is just kind of growing week over week. More people are listening. And sometimes my wife has to tell me that people do listen because I keep thinking we're making episodes that no one does. And it's kind of just humbling to have people listen to the content we're putting out. So thank you very much.